Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who usually do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we are three
best friends
because we're welcoming to the podcast Fonda Lee, the author of EXO, Zeroboxer, Untethered Sky, and our beloved Greenbone saga. And today we're chatting about Fonda's newest release, The Last Contract of Isako. Welcome, Fonda.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show again.
We love having you. It makes us happy every single
glad
time.
to have you back.
Well, like we said, we're talking about your recent release just out like this month, pretty much. Can you tell our listeners what The Last Contract of Isako is about and what they can expect when they're reading it?
Yeah. So The Last Contract of Isako is my first full-length adult science fiction novel. I've written young adult science fiction. I've written a large adult epic fantasy series. I have written young adult fantasy, and one of the projects that has been bouncing around in my head for a while is The Last Contract of Isako. I've been describing it as a dystopian, a cyberpunk samurai thriller with the vibes of Kurosawa with a dash of Blade Runner and John Wick. And I think that is probably the best way to describe its vibes. I would add, as I was at an event while I was on tour a couple of weeks ago, and fellow author Jen Lyon said, "So your book is basically a bunch of Keanu Reeves movies stuffed into a trench coat."
Or
amazing
a pea coat. So.
Right, because he's like, wait, so it's Johnny Mnemonic, 47 Ronin, and John Wick, and like Cyberpunk 2077 with a dash of the Matrix, and it's all smashed together, gender swapped with a 50-something like swordswoman. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much correct.
Perfect.
And
That's
it's
amazing.
really, at its heart, it is it's a corporate thriller and wrapped around a murder mystery, and follows the main character, Isako, who is an aging swordswoman in her world, and she is pulled into that beloved trope, the one last job.
We love to see an aging woman protagonist.
It's so good. And as you go on, I hope you just keep adding Keanu Reeves movies until they get more and more ridiculous, where you're like, and there's a little bit of The Lake House and like Found Love.
Even I can't fit that all into one book. That would have to be a series for sure.
We would buy it. Fonda, in your acknowledgments, you mentioned that The Last Contract of Isako was one of the hardest books you've ever written. Can you tell us more about that? Like how this writing experience differed from books like the Greenbone saga, which also handle really difficult themes.
Yeah, so one of the challenges of writing Isako was structural, and the other was personal. So on the personal side, it just came at a time in my life when I was managing few projects at once, including writing a young adult fantasy duology that I co-wrote with Shannon Lee. I moved across the country. I sold a house. I bought a house. I had kids go to college. So it was a lot. And there was definitely, I think, also just the anxiety of following up the Greenbone saga, which was this big sprawling project that I had lived with for so many years. And I ended up doing a major restructure on Isako. I had envisioned it originally a certain way, and I had actually planned it as two books. And my editor at the time looked at my outline and said, "Fonda, are you sure this wouldn't work better as a single novel?" And I was like, no, it's two books, and here's why. And I had all this justification. And then I started writing it, and I realized, no, this is one book. And I did a significant overhaul of my outline. And it's not the first time I've done that, but just the nature of the project was such that it was structurally challenging. But structural challenges, I'm always happy to dive into them. They're daunting, but I also enjoy them. But fundamentally, I think one of the challenges of writing this book is that it is in a very bleak setting. And anyone who opens it up and reads the first chapter is going to realize that this is a very unforgiving world. It's set in a place that is isolated from Earth. It's a colony planet that is essentially a company town. And the mega corporation that established this colony is the government. And on this world, there is a culture of toxic productivity,
Hmm.
of resource constraint, and there is a large disparity between those who have wealth and power and are able to live over 150 years, and those who do not have those resources and who often live much shorter and bleaker lives. So it was a hard book to write in, in our era when there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff going on in our world that can drive you to be very pessimistic and despairing. And so this was not um, an escape
Hmm.
into what a lot of readers are escaping to now, which is romance and cozy and feel good and hopeful, because we do need that counterbalance. And I was like, nope, I'm going to just lean all in. I'm leaning all in on the grim and the bleak and the miserable. And I'm hoping that there are readers who will come along with me, because I am one of those consumers who, during the pandemic, I just went all in on zombie movies and was like,
As much
okay,
as
the
people
world is
love doom
stressful.
scrolling.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is the doom scroll of a book a little
Exactly.
bit because it is
Right.
just so visceral. No, and you're right. Like it's dark when the book starts because in
Hmm.
chapter one, Isako is giving two men, like, no spoilers. Chapter one, she's giving them their death sentence,
Mhm.
and we also then see her kind of quickly moving into her role, telling us about what it means to be an A tier. And then she has this heartfelt moment with the director. And there's like a lot of back and forth that we're when we're meeting Isako very like quickly. And we get introduced to her in kind of like a full world. I was amazed at how quickly you gave us such a complex character. And what was it like kind of building Isako's backstory at the end of her career, giving us this
Yeah.
50-year-old woman in this very specific time span?
Yeah. And it was definitely different than building up a character that you're going to be with for a trilogy.
Hmm.
So the Greenbone Saga characters that most people know me for, they start off the story relatively young. They're in their 20s, and we follow them through decades of time. And with Isako, she comes already with a storied career, and a lot of her thought patterns and her life experience have been established. Her reputation is well known, and she is just a really different character to introduce to readers than someone who's kind of this, young and optimistic in a relatively clean slate, like with some of my young adult characters. So the challenge of writing a standalone is that you have to be much more efficient with both your world building and with your character development. So with Isako in particular, I wanted her character to come across very, very strongly through the viewpoint of um, her, her already. She's a known quantity in this world, and you get that sense fairly early on. She has a reputation that precedes her. People know her name. And that helps to sort of set the stage for what kind of character we're having. But she's also plunged immediately into unusual circumstances. She has been fighting this divisional war for several years. She is lost, and she's kind of looking down the barrel of this defeat. So yeah, I think a lot of it is giving us this character in a moment of transition, because in the moment of transition you can explain to the reader where they're coming from and how everything is about to change.
I dig that because it's like a pivotal moment that we're thrown into, and it's really fast paced from the beginning. So it's cool to see how that all plays out, and it's really neat. You mentioned that in this book, so it's set on this planet or this place of Aquilo, and there's this advanced technology that we can now like transplant consciousness into these synthetic bodies or jar brains as they're lovingly called. And there's a lot of discussions around like these synth bodies and like how they're kind of faulty at times, which is kind of funny, and how even like
Wonderful.
transplanting the consciousness, like the people who are put into these new bodies, they don't immediately like feel at ease or at home in these bodies. And a lot of this felt like discussions that were very fitting for our current culture, which is kind of pushing us towards like faces that don't move and no wrinkles, and we need to prioritize youth and things like that. So I was kind of wondering what it was like creating these synth bodies and these jarbrain characters, not necessarily characters, but this concept in our current culture.
Yeah. Cyberpunk has long used the theme of transhumanism or people altering their bodies or consciousness being separated from the physical form. And we see that a lot with, everything from the Matrix and uploading and downloading like consciousness and altered carbon and, cyborg parts. And so much of the thematic foundation from the genre is inspiring this idea um, of of the cyborg, of the jarbrains, the synthetic bodies. And I wanted these artificial bodies to kind of be indicative of our relationship with technology today. And one thing that I wanted to make clear in the text is that uh, it the technology is kind of janky. Like it's not entirely
It's almost
trustworthy, right?
comical
Like,
at times,
yeah,
really.
because so much of science fiction is kind of so sleek and futuristic. Like
Hmm.
oftentimes you watch science fiction films and it's like the technology just works. Like everything in Star Trek looks so clean most of the time, like everything
Hmm.
looks like, and I mean there of course there's exceptions. There is absolutely, the like, Firefly and like
Yeah.
the ships that kind of are falling apart. But I wanted to apply that idea to the synthetic bodies and the quick um the rounds of development that technology goes through now is so quick and imperfect
Mhm.
that like these synthetic bodies that people get transplanted into quickly become dated. So imagine, you're 70 years old and you're like, okay, my organic body is falling apart. I'm getting a new synthetic body. And then like 30 years go by and people are like, wow, that's a really dated model. The eyelids don't move right. And like the voice synthesizer is kind of bad. And so it'd be like
Just sitting
being
at there
wedded.
looking at me weird.
Exactly.
Like
Like, oh, now you're wedded to, the iPhone Model 10 and
Do you have an
have moved
iPhone
on to
5C
to-
still?
So a combination of that, like we're so dependent on technology and yet it's imperfect and it like gets outdated so quickly. And I wanted to apply that, but to like a full life experience of being inside a synthetic body.
It also has like kind of darker implications too, surrounding like how the bodies can be connected to an actual person's body, which I won't get into, listeners, because this is very spoilery. But it gets kind of dark. But I just thought it was so interesting, all the discussions surrounding these synth bodies. And when you mention them like being faulty, I think there's one mention of like a body like running or trying to run and it doesn't look right, and that made me laugh so much.
Right. Because like, why would they need to run? These are like the ultra rich and they don't need to exercise
they don't
anymore.
need to work
So
out. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and this book is very prescient because it's looking at the ultra rich going to space pretty much to run a world of their own. And it's very much about people in power utilizing the working class and focusing how to outlive everyone else and have the most resources and have monopolies, which is like my brainchild as a former lawyer where I think about monopolies all the time. But it all ties in so well with your business background. Was it fun to play in this world and create a world like to many people, it would be a billionaire's dream world?
Absolutely. It was fun to play in because I had a prior career that really lent itself to creating the character of Isako. I had a job as a management consultant. I had those 70-hour work weeks where I would travel around and go to client sites and spend a whole lot of time making PowerPoint decks and Excel spreadsheets for like C-suite executives and having, the airline points and the expense account and there was definitely a part of me when I was writing this book that treated it as like this self-reflective thought experiment of, okay, what would I be like if that had been my whole life, if I had devoted my whole life to that? And that's really kind of the little piece of myself that I put into Isako. And I think every author, we take little pieces of ourselves and put them into each of our major characters, and she was no exception.
Yeah.
It's kind of trippy to think about that too in terms of your own life. Like, what if I had done this? And let's write it. I love that.
Oh.
Well, the last contract of Isako is this unraveling mystery, and Isako is an A tier put on her last contract and before resignation, and she's confronting a lot of her past, including former mentors and mentees. And she even has like moments where she's reflecting on seeing her mentees like surpass her, which I thought was interesting. And I know you've participated in a lot of like writing retreats and serve as a mentor for others in the writing space. I was kind of wondering what that process of mentorship has been like for you and how your experiences as a mentor have shaped this book.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted Isako's story to include relationships with her mentees is because that is how she views her legacy. Part of her success in her career is having trained others who came up after her. And it's tied in with some of her own maternal guilt of like not spending enough time at home with her daughter and seeing her daughter grow up and oh my gosh, she's already grown and I wasn't home for enough of the time that she was a child. But she has put some of that energy of like of nurturing into her professional relationships. And I wanted a juxtaposition between where she's at in her career and the drive, hunger, and ambition that someone who is in a much earlier stage of their career has, and her feeling this sense of responsibility, protectiveness, pity for like some of her apprentices who are just at the start of this journey. So she gets pulled into this mystery that involves one of her former apprentices. She actually had to fight a war against one of her apprentices, and yeah, another part of like my own life experience that I wanted to put into that is kind of the sense of fulfillment, reward that comes from helping those up the ladder who are a little bit their career, and then also realizing that in so doing that like you have limited time, like they still have so much more runway in their careers than you do, and the sort of conflicted feelings that you end up having at a certain point around that as well of like, wow, I'm like really feeling that sense of like hopefulness for them, but also the sense of like cynicism that you have, maybe having kind of been through some of the stages that they're going through now.
There's nothing more corporate than being a mentor for someone and being like, do you really want this job though?
Right. Right. And I mean, like, I've absolutely had like those conversations with, I've been taught at lots of writing workshops where I'm like, you've just signed your first book contract. Like, I'm so happy for you. Congratulations. You are in for the most stressful year of your life. And
Buckle up.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. Well, like Laura said, at the heart of this book, there is kind of a mystery, and you do a really effective job at having very small breadcrumbs that later become a huge part of the novel. Like there'll be something mentioned, and then like 100 pages later, I was like, oh, I remember that. Or just world building that I thought was about like the world itself, but then ended up being part of the mystery. How do you go about structuring your book and playing around with the world when setting up the mystery of it all?
Yeah. A lot of thought around when and where to drop the breadcrumbs. So it's this balancing act, figuring out just how much information to give to the reader so that they have a bit of an idea of what's going on, but not enough that they can see everything and just like solve it immediately. So it's impossible to know what that's going to be for each individual reader. There may be readers who just feel really lost, and there may be others who are like, oh, I saw that coming a mile away. But for the most part, especially when writing a standalone, you have to kind of pick up your breadcrumbs behind you as you go along. You're like dropping these breadcrumbs, and then they're you sort of have to leave them for just the right amount of time that when you pick them back up, people are like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," but I started to forget it. Like it's that balance of like you haven't totally forgotten it, and so you are it doesn't come out of the blue, but it's also other stuff has been happening, and so maybe it start to slip from your mind until the moment that it becomes narratively significant.
I get. Well, Fonda, we previously were talking about like how the technology is so advanced and how mostly like the privileged and elite class are able to transfer their consciousness, and there's all these things that are like happening in terms of technology, but it's a little bit of my horror story because there's still like limits on what can be done because Izuko still has to wear a bra, is still getting sweaty, is dealing with hormones and everything. And we learned that the people in this society, they're not immune to the effects of like neurodegenerative diseases. And so I was kind of wondering, like, this is a science fiction story. You've made the rules. Why was it important for you to set limits on what was possible and to show how humanity can limit itself sometimes for its own selfish gain?
Yeah, I think that I generally prefer to deploy the speculative elements in my stories very judiciously and sparingly. And I want the speculative fiction worlds that I create to feel very grounded and very true to our own world. And if anything, I just want the speculative fiction elements to feel like they have like turned the dial, but they haven't flipped anything on their head, like in the sense
Mhm.
that so much of it is still recognizable. And I just like to play in that kind of sandbox because there are um, there are kind of truths about our world that would apply even if we had
Mhm.
advanced technology, even if we had magic, even if, things
Sure.
were different in some significant way.
Mhm.
So with both fantasy and science fiction, whether it's magic or whether it's tech, I just treat it like a resource. And no resource is ever equally distributed, and it's never equally accessible. So there are always going to be people who have more than others. There are always going to be limits on how this resource can be applied. There are always going to be issues and problems that arise from this resource that didn't exist before. So in the same way that like the Jade and the Greenbone saga has side effects, yes, we're on a colony planet, and yes, we were able to terraform stuff, but there are all these other things that are still issues in the society, or even perhaps even greater issues as a result of the society. So yeah, there's maybe we've solved some diseases, but new diseases have arisen because of different
Mhm.
environmental toxins or risks and so on. So yeah, I just want it to feel very much like the characters in my world have to deal with the same problems that we do.
And there's still that glimmer of hope too, like these discussions of hope that are surrounding these things too, which I thought was interesting how you incorporated that because we have the characters discussing like, oh, I hope that by this point in my life that they'll have this figured out or I won't have to worry about this. The bra thing is never brought up, which is mind blowing, but
Laura's like, they're not focusing
I'm
their
like, we're not
technology on enough
focusing on
things.
menopause and bras. Come
But
on.
doesn't that feel realistic? Like
It is
some rich
realistic.
person is going to solve transplanting your brain into
But
another body
we will never care
before we
about
solve.
women's health.
Yeah.
I'm going to get on a soapbox now.
Amazing. Well, we've been talking a lot about the different resources and things like that because there's so much in this book. And I think Laura and I are doing our best at not just spoiling everything for people because it just came out. But something I really took notice
Oh,
of was like the name conventions you used in your book. Someone in the book points out that you named someone Tidal, and that's like it's a tide coming in and it's huge. But like Isako's name is also Isthmus, and we have Dragonfly Matrim, and you have these like very natural naming conventions. What was the importance of naming in your book, and like how did that reflect the characters?
I love naming. I think it's one of the funnest parts of world building for me is coming up with the logic and reason behind why things are called what they are. And one of the core elements of the society that has been isolated from Earth is this long-term vision that they have of terraforming the planet and making it like Earth. So Earth, by this time, has faded in the memory of people to the extent that it's like a legend, it's mythology to them. And there's religions that people believe in where if you once you die, you get reincarnated on Earth, and Earth is this mystical place where there's all this oxygen, there's all this water, and so
Unlimited
one
resources, which is mind blowing.
right, yeah, exactly. Like for in their mind, it's like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, like you don't have to pay for oxygen. That's incredible.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that I wove into the world to kind of highlight that theme is the fact that all of these family names are rooted in geographic or elements or flora or fauna from Earth that they are unfamiliar with. Names like rain and island and isthmus and crane and all these things that they don't have any personal familiarity with, but that tie them back to their ancestral homeland. So that's that. And then I also needed to kind of create the logic of like, well, what what is the logic behind like some people having names that are geographic formations and they originally came from like certain types of professions versus those who have names that are named after animals and they certainly came from certain types of professions. So yeah, and plus also I just like names that sound cool.
I mean, it's tons of fun. And like Dragonfly Martine, like that's awesome. Rain Cobb, like so fun. I dig them. Well, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but you have this moment in the book that really connected with me. And it's when Issa is kind of reflecting on her relationship with her daughter. And she reflects on a lot of her relationships, especially like with her father and her daughter. But there's this moment where she mentions not wanting her daughter to be like her and kind of wanting her daughter to be somewhat removed from the work that she does and to be a better person than her and to be maybe more like the women around her. And I thought it was just like this really complex way to look at parenthood. And I was kind of wondering if you find it difficult to write topics like this while trying to show grace to the characters in the situations, because I do think you really excel at writing these family dynamics because you give the characters, like as readers we can be like, oh, but Issa, like be easier on yourself, like this is so hard, you're a working mom, you've got such a stressful job and all this. So I was just wondering if it's hard for you to kind of like show grace to your characters and write these situations.
I think that I feel for my characters. I do have sympathy for them, but I try to live in their heads and to depict them how they view themselves, and also how others view them. And, a lot of the family dynamics that I put on the page, whether it's Isako with her daughter or the family relationships that are in the Greenbone saga, I just want them to feel real and human. And I think that a lot of the thoughts that Isako has around being a mother are ones that I relate to.
Mhm.
This feeling of like being torn between career and family life, and also feeling like, you want to do right by your kids, you want to provide for
Yeah.
them, and also a sense of distance that she feels as her daughter grows up and moves on with her life, and her daughter is very different from her. And like as a mom, I know that like there's so much of my kids that they came that way. And they were wired that way when from day one. And so
Mhm.
I think that like I I want the interiority of my characters to just feel authentic. And sometimes they are very hard on themselves. Um, but we all are maybe a little hard
Oh,
on
for
ourselves.
sure. It's so interesting too, like you mentioning like your experience with your own children, because I'm sure my parents like look at me and they're like, how does this being that looks like us act so weird and different from us? What's going on here? Like, this isn't what we thought was going to happen, but we still love it and we can't decide what's going on.
Well, it's so nice because there's even moments where like Isako did have a complicated life and she'll comment, she's just like, I don't really have the right to have an opinion on this, but she has one and it's like fighting with her.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful
Yeah.
representation. Well, and Isako is also someone who's going through generational change, it feels like, because there are certain things she's commenting on about the A tiers. She points out that other people aren't as rigid or they don't follow the code as much, or like the thing she is most valued for is becoming less important in the day and age.
Hmm.
I know you personally love a complicated character, but she also seems to be someone who kind of wants to be black and white, but the world around her
Hmm.
is gray. And I don't know if there's a good question for this, but was it like interesting to play around with a more rigid character like for such a long period and like sitting with her in this moment?
Yeah, like absolutely. I think you nailed it, really, that she is a character who wants a certain degree of stability,
Hmm.
certainty, and instead of leaning on religion for her code of how to live, she has relied on the contractor code, the A tier code, which is one that really prioritizes client service and the amorality of like her duty to the her profession and the excellence that she embodies with like her craft and her ability as a swordswoman. So those are the things that are kind of the the grounding elements of her life. Um, at the same time, she's self-aware and she knows that like that the world is not that simple. And yet she chooses to be like, okay, well, what I can do is I can kind of live the best way that I know. Um, and so it is tricky because, I'm sure that there are readers who are like, oh, like they probably do get impatient with her, being like, well, why do you keep believing in this code, this system that clearly is like not really serving you very well, right? But like we have tons of examples in real life of
Yeah.
people doing the
Yeah.
exact same thing.
Yep.
So I think that honestly, like her reaction is very true to life and believable because she is kind of clinging to the things that have defined her, especially as she gets older. And there's change and there's fewer and fewer things that she can rely on. She can no longer rely on her physical prowess, on her her status, on there's things that are kind of slowly slipping away from her, and she can still kind of hang on to her principles. And I think that's very true for people. I mean, we certainly
Mhm.
know people who, as they get older, or they start losing the things that maybe they that have been of value to them. Their principles get more and more rigid, and that's something she struggles with in the course of the story.
It's very
You know, she's really,
realistic. Yeah.
yeah. And she's really reflective throughout all of this book, really. And I feel like I keep falling back on the relationships that you portray and how well done they are in your writing. But I was kind of wondering when you're writing like a one-sided or reflective look at a relationship, how does that vary from portraying it in like real time and having the characters interact? And what aspects are you trying to focus most on?
Um, I think really when I'm writing relationships between characters, I'm trying to focus on the subtext between them. So oftentimes when I'm writing a story, the first draft feels very like a movie script where like the dialogue is
Mhm.
very like straightforward and the characters are saying what's on their minds. And then as I go through the revision process and I get to know the characters a little bit better, hopefully what happens is that there's less said and there's more implied, especially with characters that have a history with each other, like family
Mhm.
members, or in the case of this book, the relationship that she has with her good friend Rain Cobb. They've known each other for
Mhm.
decades, they've fallen out of touch, they get back together. But it is one of those situations where, like, you have a very good old friend and you catch back up with them, and you can kind of pick up where you left off because you're so familiar with each other. So, because I like working in that space of characters who have history together. I can create more nuanced interactions between them because they can refer to their shared experiences
Yeah.
in a less obvious and oblique way. So, for example, there's if you know there when Rain, Cobb, and Isako are fighting together, they know how to fight together because they've done it before. If they're having a conversation and they mention, some shared acquaintance that they have, they they already know how the other person feels about that person. And so there's this process that I have with character dialogue and interactions where I can strip away. And sometimes what might be start off as like a whole paragraph of dialogue can be reduced down to like a line or two with some additional context. It could just be body language, it could be a look, it could be a tone of voice that communicates.
It's so subtle, and I feel like that takes a lot of skill to, and people watching, honestly, to kind of hone in on those types of things.
I feel like you made every writer happy too by being like, I write the most, like, just here's what everyone's feeling on the page, and then I
Hmm.
parse back. I feel like that
Yeah.
speaks to a lot of writers. So,
Mhm.
uh, there's also a large discussion towards, like, not the beginning of the novel, but within some of the depths of the novel about personhood and what it means to be part of a capitalistic structure, and if a person could even own their own body, and what you have to do to survive in this. Why were these themes important for you to kind of play with in this world and highlight?
Well, I think autonomy is just a huge part of this story because it is a world in which the environment outside is so incredibly hostile. And I really wanted to draw on the vibes that I experience when I read or watch Dune. So that's one of my favorite science fiction franchises. And I love the fact that the incredibly harsh desert landscape dictates so much of the society and how people behave and everything down to like their customs, spitting to show respect because you're giving up the water of your body. So I wanted to do that in this book. And because this society is essentially trapped under an air shield and you cannot leave, the outside of this company town is fatal. There is there's a natural restriction on your freedom and the autonomy. And for a lot of people, um, that's like that's just their day-to-day life. Like they're fine with it. They have their jobs and so on. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of surface as a theme is like how much control do people have in this world? And as like the story progresses, you see more and more the layers get pulled back of just like how little our main characters know, and as a result, like how little control they have over some things. And that is true on a meta level, but also on the level of like the prevalent technology and the fact that yeah, there's an ability for certain people to go into these synthetic bodies, but what happens when the synthetic bodies, again, the speculative element, is a finite resource and only certain people can afford it? What does that like? What are the ramifications of that? Like, who owns it? If someone has paid for this body, but someone else inhabits it, and moral conundrums like that science fiction writers
Mhm.
just love. We just love moral
This is so
quandaries
fun.
that come out of that.
You mentioning Dune, so I have this special edition of Dune, and I noticed that your cover for your book is a little bit similar. We have our protagonist kind of with
Mhm.
the flowing cape or coat in the wind there in this like not great atmosphere, really. So kind of unique that that's one of your favorite stories and that your cover
Yeah,
fits with that.
and it really was because when we started discussing covers, I said I want something that gives me the vibes of Dune and Blue Eye Samurai.
Nailed it.
Beautiful.
And
Nailed it.
yeah,
Nailed it.
I think they nailed it.
Well, I'm going to get into some spoilery questions now. So, listeners, if you have not read The Last Contract of Isako, stop what you're doing, go read the book, because I need to ask some spoilery questions. All right, you're gone. So, Fonda, I feel like I've asked a lot of questions about Issa, but we have this shift in the novel and we switch to a section on Dragonfly Martim. And seeing his POV and kind of getting to see some of his insecurities play out was really like kind of refreshing and really endeared me to him as a character because he's just really ambitious and tries so hard and everybody just kind of underestimates him. And I was wondering what it was like to write this contrast between these two very different A tiers and one who, like Martim, is just incredibly effective, but often misunderstood and underestimated.
Yeah. So it is hard to talk about this book without significant spoilers. So
I've been
I'm
holding everything in.
We held
the
off for
spoiler
like
section.
the first 45 minutes, so we did good.
Very well done. I know.
Hannah gave me the eye
impressed.
earlier, and I was like, ha.
So when I first started working on this book, I tried interspersing Martine's chapters with Isako's. And it started off being kind of your traditional dual POV narrative, with Martine's chapters being in the past and Isako's being in the present. And then I have to really credit my editor because she said, "What if you didn't do that? Like, what if you just held off and introduced Martine later?" And I said, "Well, that seems like, well, and I have to say, like, it was definitely a risk, because there is this jarring moment in which you're like, oh my gosh, like we're in Martine's point of view. And the way that I sort of set it up was I wanted Martine to kind of feel like a character you were starting to get to know before you hit his POV, with the little epigraphs that include his like recovered diary files and the fact that Isako like is thinking about him and and has already a perspective on him before you meet him. And so I want you to feel like you're kind of starting to have a picture of Martine. And then when you do switch into his point of view, that picture gets very complicated. And he's very much a character that is, he has this self-assurance that hides his insecurity. And he's very driven in a desperate kind of way. And I wanted to kind of capture, honestly, some of the vibe of some of the people that I knew in business school who are 22 years old and all they want is they want that high paying job on Wall Street. And I knew these guys, right? Like I just knew the guys who were like, this is my ticket. This is my golden ticket. I just need to get the internship with Goldman Sachs, or whatever it was. And I wanted Martine's journey to be one that starts to like reveal the cracks in Isako's understanding of the world and does so in a way that is essentially a corruption arc because there's such a slippery slope that he finds himself on and the things that he ends up doing in the name of the code that Isako is so determined to uphold is it essentially destroys him. So his character was fun to write, but also
it's
sad
really
to write.
Fascinating, honestly. So I read a lot of this book while I was at work. I work part-time in a library, and my coworker was laughing at me because I was going, oh my gosh, things just got wild. And it was a lot in Martine's section. And I think I was just immediately like kind of drawn to this character because he notices details that other people have failed to notice. He's very ambitious, but like you said, it's just this cautionary tale almost where it's like, don't fly too close to the sun there. But
well, I'm so glad to hear that you did have them like interspersed because it actually blew through one of my questions where I was like, it feels like Isako gets the rug pulled out from under her in the section. And was that always the case? And it's like, oh no, we were supposed to kind of have this dual perspective, but like it makes sense. And I love the switch. It's really effective to just suddenly have this like, now we're here and we're cooking. But he's such an interesting character because I feel like in the first section we get like almost Isako's image of him, which is based on her reality of him succeeding.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And it's not until we get into the second section that we find out that he was kind of just lucky in a way. Like he's so driven and he is very talented, but he also wasn't supposed to exactly get where he was supposed to be. So
A lot of chance.
like a lot of chance.
Yep.
And again, I keep asking you if like certain parts of were fun because I know this is a dark book, but it feels like so fun to write. But like, was
Yeah.
it interesting to kind of play with his motivations and kind of build him up in the reader's mind? And in the second section really pulled the rug out from under us. So.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was really fun because a lot of the characters that you meet in Isako's section of the book, you're only getting her perspective on. So Sambar Uchi, for example, right? I mean, she just sees him as like a villain, like he's just, the antagonist of the story. And then you get to Martim's section and it gets complicated. And he has this relationship with his boss that is close, but also toxic. But so there, and then you have also he has a different um relationship with Cobb, and his encounter with Cobb is
Mhm.
very different than
Mhm.
how Ithako sees him, right? So I have a lot of love for Chambara samurai films, and one of the inspirational elements that went into the story is the movie Rashomon. The Rashomon is this Kurosawa film in which you have a story that is told from different perspectives over again. And when it's told over from someone else's perspective, the facts change and like things are
Mhm.
different. And so I love that, the idea of like people just having like the story being substantially different when seen through another person's eyes. And that was a bit of the of what I wanted to accomplish with Martine's section.
Very
Effectively
effective.
done. So ultimately, it seems like Isako is kind of on a grief journey in this book. She's
Mhm.
grieving decisions she made, her father, her former relationships, relationships with her mentees and her daughter, who she feels she could have supported differently. And she's also just kind of grieving this life she created in her work and the sacrifices she made for it. And your dedication and acknowledgments kind of seem tied into this too. I was kind of wondering if there was a bit of a grieving process for you writing this book.
That's a good question. Don't know if it was a grieving process so much as like a contemplative process of,
Mhm.
you know, the 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 evaluation of choices in our lives. I think everyone goes through this at some point of um the things that you've done led to paths that like might be great, but they close the door on others, right? And so I think like honestly, a lot of Isako's personal ruminations about her life and her career and aging just kind of came with like me like nearing 50 and being like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting old. And so like I
Mhm.
put a lot of my own fears about aging into Isako. Because
Sure.
in our society, like 50 is old. It's not that old, but it's old. I think especially for women,
Sure.
you reach a point where it's like, okay, you're seen as you go from being like it feels, at least in like the experience of your life, it feels very quick.
Mhm.
Where you go from being young to like, oh, now you're old. and um and what would it be like if that was even more extreme? Like
Mhm.
what would that be like if you were in a setting where like you were in a profession where being hitting 50 was like ancient, and that was like you're
Mhm.
nearing the end of your life. And so yeah, I put a lot of my own like existential angst um
Mhm.
about aging and about limited time and about seeing like um you know people around me get old, seeing like my people that I know and who are not that much older than me getting sick, um or you know even like people of my generation that I know who've died. Like it's like
Hmm.
it's really sobering. Um, and I think that having having a character like Isako for whom mortality is so real, like it's so immediate, just helped me kind of make those feelings more tangible in a like story setting.
That's really
I've
beautiful.
recently reached an age, so I'm 33, almost 34, and I've recently realized that if you tell children how old you are, that they go, whoa, and kind of have that jerk reaction like, oh, that's super old. And I don't know
Oh my
why
gosh.
that affects me in the way that it does because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not old. You're just like a baby. What are you talking
Right.
about?
No, it's so funny because I remember like watching some video and it was like interviewing kids on college campuses and they were like, what year would you have to be born to be old? And they were like, I guess before 2000. And I was like,
You're just like, okay, right.
right. And then like
Uh,
going into the grocery store and seeing the like you can only purchase alcohol if you were born after this date,
Oh
getting
yeah.
closer and closer
mhm.
to the time that you're like, wait a second.
Um, excuse you, that can't be right.
Yeah.
See, I always had the reverse problem where I was like the baby, so my sister was always 10 years older than me, and I always think about her age, and I'm like, well, I don't think she's old yet, so I can't be old, and then I just move on with my life. Uh, this book has a lot of like you said, it's kind of it's a dark, a rough hang in some sections, and a lot of this book looks at the rich and the haves and haves not. And I tab so many paragraphs about how humans are often our own worst enemy when it comes to building these systems ourselves that set us up for our own destruction. But I also notice even with the end of the book, there's kind of a stark look at if people can even affect change. Were there any parts that were kind of difficult for you to look at and write when you're thinking about like current humanity and how it, sh reflects in this book?
Yeah. So fundamentally, I was working in a genre that it is pretty bleak. So, this is kind of dystopic leaning cyberpunk world. And, one of the kind of core tenets of cyberpunk is the high tech, low life, right? Like we have this high technology, and yet there is still corruption, there is still crime, there are still people who are outcast, who are poor, who are marginalized. And that is kind of a inherently maybe bleak or pessimistic or realistic way to look at the world. Originally, so we're getting deep into spoiler territory here. So if you haven't logged off yet and you haven't read the book, you really need to do so now. Originally, I had, and this goes back to what I said in the acknowledgments about the challenge of restructuring this book. I had a different ending when I started writing this book. And in that original ending, they reestablished contact with Earth. And that is, I think, the ending that might have been expected based on the premise, right? It's the story of like, oh, okay, you have this planet. It's been isolated from Earth for 500 years. What's going to happen at the end of the book? They're going to reestablish contact with Earth. Like it's kind of the like if I had ended it that way, it would have been like okay, that's sort of the obvious setup that the premise has created.
Mhm.
And as I was writing the book, it just didn't feel right. It felt like a space opera ending rather than a, a, a cyberpunk ending or a samurai story ending. And the one of the things that I really um, saw as a connective piece of narrative tissue between cyberpunk and samurai fiction is that oftentimes the protagonists know that they can't win, right? Like there's a certain degree of like they live in a society that is very strictly stratified, and whether that is like feudal Japan or it's like a technocracy in like the far future, there are these like systems that just make it so that the people above them have so much power, And if they're going to rebel, it's not going to end well with them for them. Like back to my Keanu Reeves 47 Ronin,
Mhm.
right? Like at the beginning, these 47 Ronin, this does not end well for them. Like that's in the premise. Like, they see this injustice, they want to avenge what they see as a great wrong, but in doing so, they know they're giving up their lives, and this that's the cost. That's the price they have to pay. So, ending the story in which like they reestablish contact with Earth feels like, okay, now we're going to turn this into like, there's
Series.
going to be now, yeah, it's going to be a series. There's going to be like, galactic politics and it's opening up the doors to a whole new era and yada yada. And that didn't feel right to me. To me, the heart of the story is Isako's journey. And it's about her coming to acceptance with the things she cannot control in her life, including the powers above her, what happens to those that she cares about, and her own mortality. And it felt more real for me to be like, the message at the end of the story for her is not that she changed anything or made big waves or broke the system or led a revolution. It's that she came to a place of acceptance about how she lives her own life and the choices that she can make in the time that she has remaining. And that completely has restructured the story, but I think made it more true to what her journey needed to be.
I know, like, as I was reading this book, I was getting closer to the end, and I'm like, wow, she's got like really limited options here. What's going to happen? How can this end well for her? This is, wait a minute. And it ends in a way that I think is honestly just kind of a little scary for all of us
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
fairly open-ended and unknown. And we don't like to live in that unknown area. Like, that's,
Right.
and I was kind of wondering, like, in terms of your writing journey, like going forward, is this something you want to explore more of, like the unknown? And is in terms of like your writing journey, do you know what you're going to be writing next, or is that also a little unknown?
Oh gosh. That talk about
Loaded question.
talk about bringing it a little too close to home.
Pull you into that trap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, like Isako, do you know what you're doing with your life? So,
You're gonna go get a cinnamon roll. It'll be fine.
yeah, exactly. Right.
You can say no.
First pastries, and then I'll figure it out. Um, so, uh, so yeah, that's like I think that's very astute and a great observation. This is not the first time I've written an ending that I think lands in a place of bittersweet ambiguity. And I actually just really find satisfaction in that emotional note. I don't necessarily know why. I feel like oftentimes the like very tidy, happy ending that you get in like a lot of Hollywood films just falls flat for me. I always want to feel like the story ends because that's where the character stopped talking rather than
Mm.
that's like everything was solved, right? And
Mhm.
I think that like that feels more authentic to me because there never is really a time in our lives when it's like, oh yeah, like we've got like everything is just like tidy and wrapped in a bow and like there are no more like lingering concerns. I feel like
You mentioned the rom-com books being something people are drawn to earlier. I'm like, I always want a rom-com ending for myself, but in my real life, but it is way more interesting to read about people who have these unknown endings.
yeah. And back to your question of like what are you going to do next, Fonda? I don't know yet. So I am in the process of talking to my publisher about what the next project is. I have been mulling returning to a fantasy series, and that is certainly a possibility. Um, and, and I have other ideas that have been on the back burner. It's definitely a question of like, okay, which of these do I tackle, and which ones are speaking to me, and um, to be determined. To
To
be
be
determined.
determined.
Yes,
Okay.
like
Wonderful.
Itsuko, I will eat a
Yeah.
pastry and then take it a day at a time.
You're
Dig
like,
it.
I am going to leave you guys on a bittersweet note by not giving you an answer.
You know what? I'm cool with it.
We love it. And Fonda, thank you so much for coming back and joining us
Yes.
on this discussion. We loved this book. We love talking about it, as you can see from our
Mm.
very detailed questions. But can you tell listeners what you're reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Yeah, so reading, I am actually in the middle of reading a science fiction thriller that I've been meaning to get to for a while, which is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch.
Oh,
Oh,
It
hmm
is another science fiction novel that uh, has some deep themes in it around how you live your life and choices not taken or not taken. So I'm enjoying that. I have been enjoying anime, so Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood being my top S tier anime of all time. I am currently in the middle of watching as it comes out weekly, Demons of the Shadow Realm and Frieren, which is a anime that I'm really enjoying because it is this slow burn character
I love that
study.
manga
Do you
series.
love it? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I will
Frieren
not
is
go
great.
off on a giant tangent about how
No,
much
go
I'm
ahead.
enjoying Free Ren. But yeah, I love it. And it also has actually a lot of themes about like life and choices made
Yes.
and I mean Free Ren is a character, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the series, who has lived an awful long time, is like 1,000 years old, and so like perspective on human life is just totally different for her, and like everyone else seems to just like live such a short life that they don't like her sense of emotional attachment is so different, and
The
so yeah,
unbothered way she handles everything is so
exactly,
hilarious.
so funny and yeah, she's an interesting character. And again, I think maybe there's just a connective element to everything that I'm writing, reading, and enjoying right now, which comes with, I don't know, having midlife
I was
thoughts
gonna
and
say Dark Matter is also
looking
very
back on
much
life
like
and thought,
what choices did we
yes,
make and what did we do? So you got both
yeah.
Laura and my quadrants.
Well, Fonda, where can people find you online and find your works?
Well, my website is fondalee.com and my Instagram is at fonda.lee. That's where I usually am when I'm on the social medias. And also, I put out an author newsletter, and it's probably the best way to find out where I'm going to be, where I'm going to be on tour, and what my next projects are.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. If you ever want to come back and talk TV with
Yes.
us or any works, you are welcome. And for all of our listeners, you know where to find us. We're at OWWR Pod
Hmm.
on all the platforms we exist, mostly Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok, or you can
Yeah.
find what we're doing over at ourpod.com. And thank you again, Fonda.
Yeah. Thanks, Fonda.
Thank you
Bye.
both. Bye
Bye.
bye.